All right, guys, welcome to the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. This is your host, John Heck. This is going to be the first version of the Q&A that I'm going to be doing here weekly. So every Sunday on my Instagram, I'll be putting out in the stories that Q&A. I've generally just answered those live on Instagram every Sunday, but moving forward, I'm going to collect all those questions on Sundays, answer them here on the podcast, release this podcast on Sundays, and then intake questions on Instagram for the upcoming week. Now, if you hear a newborn baby crying in the background, I apologize. My wife is out there fighting for her life right now. We have a newborn baby. He's a few weeks old, so that may be a little bit of a regular guest appearance on the podcast moving forward, but hey, that's life. So anyway, before I get into these questions, just giving a few announcements for what to expect coming up. So like I said, weekly, I'll be doing these Q&A versions of the podcast that I collect from the Instagram questions. I will also be releasing a weekly guest interview where we go into the long form conversation. I just put out the most recent or the first inaugural episode of the podcast interviewing my friend and big time fitness icon, the Barefoot Sprinter. On deck, I've got some interviews coming up with a couple all-time world record holding powerlifters. I've got a couple coaches from the realms of powerlifting and strongman I'll be having on the show, and then a big time strength and conditioning coach from the NFL who's now in the private sector, followed by another NFL strength and conditioning coach who specializes in speed. So I'm going to leave those guys unnamed for now. You'll see them as I release those episodes. I'm really excited about what's coming up. Like I've said in the first episode, the goal is to bring on a variety of guests from all sorts of different realms of the world of training and performance and nutrition, the fitness industry. You know, I've had the unique experience of having connections and experiences in all these places. We're going to get some bodybuilders on and bodybuilding coaches go into nutrition and training from that side of things, physique enhancement, all of that. So I want this podcast to be sort of all encompassing, all different perspectives of everything that goes into training, physique, nutrition, and the fitness industry as a whole, whether that's business, social media, all of those things. I think it's the most interesting way we can get a lot of different perspectives on here. So couple other announcements. My website will be launching soon, hammerandchiselperformance.com, where I will be releasing several new programs. Going to have a program for athletic development that's obviously geared towards team sport athletes, football players, and more. It's going to cover the field side of training, speed, conditioning, change of direction, acceleration, deceleration, all those things, as well as the weight room component. And then I'll have some powerlifting programs, strongman programs. These will all be on the website, as well as an ebook that I'll be releasing. And then if you go to the link in my bio on Instagram, I currently have a 12-week power building program and a 12-week physique program available on Train Heroic. I'm getting some great feedback on those. And then running, of course, my coaching business, Hammer and Chisel Performance, where I'm offering one-on-one coaching for nutrition and training program. Shoot me a DM on Instagram for that. Once the website is launched, I'll be conducting all that business through the website. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into these questions here. So the first question, are you coming over to Strongman? So tentatively, I would like to say yes. So I competed in Strongman for several years. And at the time, my goal was to take it all the way. I wanted to be a pro. Then COVID happened, things got shut down, competitions were canceled. And then before I could get back into it, I suffered a pretty catastrophic back injury. I had a disc injury that has resulted in some permanent nerve damage in my right leg that has really limited my ability to do heavy moving events, heavy yoke, heavy farmer carries, things like that. I have minimal strength in my right calf, which certainly leaves my Achilles tendon predisposed to popping under heavy load there. But with that said, I've gained a lot of function back in it. Strongman it's my love. I would love to compete in it, but I'm a very all or nothing guy. It's hard for me to dive into competitive anything without trying to be the best at it. And the reality for me, to be the best I can be in strongman I've got to be damn near 400 pounds. I mean, I'm 6'7". I move pretty well, but in order to have the static strength necessary to be competitive at a pro level, I would have to be huge. The time demands of strongman training are much higher than that of bodybuilding or powerlifting. I mean, some of the event sessions for strongman, we're talking 3-hour sessions. And me with a young baby at home, it's harder to manage that. So tentatively, I want to say yes. I would like to do at least a local strongman show in the next year. Whether or not I pursue that beyond that, we'll see. But at the end of the day, strongman training is always a type of training that I love. I see a ton of value in just for holistic strength development, and it's fun. So at a minimum, I will still be incorporating strongman programming into my training and just utilizing it at various phases of the year. All right, next question. What are some high paying jobs you can get with an exercise science degree? Well, honestly, for most people, the money is probably going to be in personal training or private coaching. Obviously, I went the strength and conditioning route in football. It's a saturated field. It is hard to get in at a high level. Most young strength coaches, whether you're working in football, whether you are working in Olympic sports, you're not making much money. I mean, my first year as a strength and conditioning coach, as a full-time coach, I was making $35,000. And that's typical. I mean, some guys are making nothing. Some guys they're on part-time deals, making 20 grand a year and grinding. So if you're trying to get into strength and conditioning for sports, it's an uphill battle, and it will be a while, if ever, before you are making real money. Now, with that said, if you do make it to a big time program in football, you will be making tons of money. But for most people, you might not be able to get your foot into the door in that industry. So going with the personal training side of things, going with the private coaching, working with more general population, that is probably where the money is going to be. And it's going to be a more realistically accessible career path for most people. So now if you get into that game, you're probably looking at mainly commission. So, and again, that starts slow. You got to build a client base. You got to market. You got to build a following. Get a little bit of a name for yourself. So, I have an exercise science degree from the University of North Carolina. It's worked out well for me, but I can just tell you the first few years are a grind. Okay, next question. How much protein do women need to ingest daily while building muscle? So, I don't view the protein intake for women versus men as different. Generally, my recommendation, it's going to be the old standard generic recommendation of a gram of protein per pound of body weight. Now, that is going to be overshooting a little bit. Research has shown us that we do not need that much protein, especially if we're in a calorie surplus. We can probably scale that protein intake back and probably go for closer to a gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. Now, if you're in a calorie deficit, I would push protein on the higher end. When we are in a surplus, we've got a lot of carbs in the equation that's protein sparing. You're going to have a better chance of building muscle with lower amounts of protein. Our body doesn't need a ton of protein to grow muscle tissue. But again, if you're in a deficit, you're going to need more of the protein. It's going to be more satiating, but it's also going to give you a much better shot of retaining all of your tissue. All right, next question. Coming out of the college and pro sector, outside of time, what are you most excited about? Getting to call my own shots, getting to be my own boss, not having to deal with the politics that are going on behind the scenes in football. At the end of the day, in football, a huge chunk of your time, it's not spent coaching, it's not spent programming. In season, you're not doing a ton of that. You're having to deal with the football coaches themselves. You're having to deal with the trajectory of the season, wins and losses, and all these things. You're bound by NCAA rules. You're bound by team rules. All of these different variables, and you're on a staff. You have to abide first and foremost by what the head football coach wants. If you're an assistant strength and conditioning coach, obviously you're probably not writing the program yourself. Whereas now, doing my own thing in private coaching, I have full autonomy with my programming. I get to spend the year allocated to exclusively coaching and running my business and doing the things that I want to do. So that's what I'm most excited about. Um, what have you found to be the best cardio split for someone who lifts 5 to 6 days a week? So, honestly, for most people, when it comes to cardio, I actually recommend just getting a lot of walking in. I recommend shooting for a daily step count. Now, if you're an athlete or you're someone training for a competition that has a conditioning demand, okay, obviously you need to train for that. You need to get in shape for that. You need to be in condition for that. But if you're someone who's just trying to improve your physique, lose body fat, gain muscle, just be healthy in general, my recommendation is just stay active throughout the day, getting in a lot of walking. Get up in the morning, go for a morning walk. Take an evening walk before bedtime. Take a few 10-minute walks throughout the day after meals. Having just all of that activity building up, not sitting for hours on end, that's going to go a long way for just total daily calorie expenditure. And it's just something you can do where you're not having to block off an hour out of your day to go to the gym or get on a treadmill. You're not having to change your clothes because you're sweaty. You can do it at any time. It's super convenient and it's effective. When I'm dieting down, I haven't gotten on a treadmill or a bike or a Stairmaster in years. I've gotten it all through walking. All right, moving on. When wanting to train for hypertrophy, where do I start? So I would get on a muscle group split, meaning you're dividing the week up based on muscle groups. So, having a day allocated to chest and triceps, having a day allocated to delts, having a back day, maybe getting 2 leg days in where one day's quad focus, one day is hamstring focus, but breaking your week up into a body part split, choosing exercises that are going to effectively target and isolate those muscles. So, for example, for quads, that may not be a back squat. That may be something more like a hack squat, a narrow stance Smith machine squat, a leg press, leg extensions. A lot of machine work is probably going to be a better choice for hypertrophy because it's going to allow you to effectively target the muscle you're trying to grow. It's going to allow you to push to failure or near failure without bringing in a ton of other muscle groups into the equation. It's safer, it's more stable. Now, in terms of volume, if you follow Paul Carter on Instagram at Lift Run Bang, he puts out a lot of great information just as far as a lower volume, higher intensity approach to hypertrophy training. And I very much agree with that. Kind of getting away from the old submaximal 4 sets of 12 type programming and more going for 2 hard sets per exercise, shooting for about 5 working sets per muscle group per session for a total of 9 to 10 working sets per muscle group per week, but pushing those sets hard and heavy, leaving only 1 rep in the tank, if not pushing to failure on those. That's going to give you a much better stimulus on the tissue as opposed to all the submaximal high volume fluff work that is not necessarily stimulating the tissue, but it's incurring a bigger recovery demand. Let's see. Next question. Any plan to compete and try to be a successful professional strongman? So again, just going back to my first answer to that question, I think at this point, trying to push to be a pro is probably out of the cards for me. That it just becomes a full-time job at that point. And right now, running a business, being a family man, that's probably not in the cards for me. I'm going to continue to incorporate strongman training into my life every year, and I would like to do a local show. But in terms of trying to push to be the best, I think those days are done for me. All right. Do you plan on opening your own facility in the future as you start this new path? Potentially. Right now, I in my mind, I would love to open up a brick and mortar. My wife and I were going to be moving back to North Carolina to the Triangle area, Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill, and I would love to have a brick and mortar where I cater to meatheads, powerlifters, bodybuilders, strongmen, and then also I can train athletes, whether that's high school athletes, college and professional off-season guys. I would love to do that. Right now, the remote coaching business is going well. I'm able to work primarily from home. We've got a newborn baby. Um, and the business side of opening a brick and mortar, that's going to be new for me. Scaling, hiring employees, maintenance, all the overhead costs, all these things. That's something I'm going to need to feel comfortable about and have some good advisors in my corner working with me on before I really ventured down that path. But if I had to guess, I would say that is a likely development in the future for me. If you had to choose one, powerlifting, strongman, or bodybuilding, which would you choose? If I had to choose one, probably strongman, because that's going to be offer the most variety. It's going to be the most challenging, the most fun to program. There's so much variety within all the events. You can, you know, change it up constantly. I think it's going to be a great way to holistically develop head to toe overall strength and size. Now, with that said, there's also part of me that might say bodybuilding just from more of a longevity standpoint, because honestly, strongman does take a huge toll on your body. Handling the strongman implements, it's awkward, it's hard, it's heavy, it beats you up. As awesome and fun as it is, with a bodybuilding approach, sessions are shorter, it's easier on your joints, a lot of machine work. You know, it's something that I could probably do effectively and safely for the rest of my training career. So if I knew I could stay healthy, I'd say strongman. Realistically, I'd probably say bodybuilding. But the beauty of what I do is I get to incorporate all of them, and I choose to incorporate all of them. I'll have phases in the year dedicated to bodybuilding where the goal is physique enhancement, improving body composition, building muscle, giving the joints a break from all the heavy strongman work. But then I rotate to a strength phase later in the year where I'm bigger. I am turning all that new muscle tissue into strength, and I'm doing the strongman stuff. I do have goals to do a powerlifting meet, although my professional strongman pursuit is probably over. I do have a bucket list goal of totaling 2,000 raw on the powerlifting program platform. So I'd like to continue to incorporate all three of those. Let's see. How do some, like James Harrison, manage to quote unquote overtrain but still see results? Well, I would question you to say, how do you know they're necessarily overtraining? If they're seeing results, I would argue they're not overtraining. I think the definition to me of overtraining would be you're training hard to a point where you are regressing in training. If you're still improving, that means you're recovering. Therefore, you are not overtraining. But then the other thing is, you see these guys posting up the big lifts on Instagram. How much have they necessarily actually truly progressed? You know, if the same guys just lifting the same big 5 plate bench press video after video after video, well, that hasn't necessarily gotten stronger. He might just be maintaining. You can never really judge by what you're seeing on social media. Um, Do you train with athletes at times? Yes, absolutely. Within my coaching business, a lot of the clients I'm working with are athletes. I'm working with a bunch of football players at the high school and NFL level. I'm working with athletes from other sports. I'm working with strength athletes. I will always strive to continue to work with field based athletes. Within my coaching business, it's something I have expertise in and it's something I love. And it's always going to give me an additional challenge as a coach to have to program the field work side of things. Let's see. How much of being a strength coach is actually coaching versus other responsibilities? So, good question. I touched on this earlier. If you are a strength and conditioning coach in a team setting, particularly in football, a lot of your year is not coaching. You know, in season, the training is it's more of a maintenance approach. Lifts are shorter. It's not so much of a development approach. Now, with your young guys, your non travel guys, those guys, you still get to actually train and push them and develop them. But for the majority of the team, the focus shifts more into keeping them healthy, scaling back training. You're spending a lot of time at practice. You're spending a lot of time dealing with the football coaches. And then in the off season, if you're in college, you're recruiting. So there are so many components of the job. So many hours of your day are spent not on the floor coaching and not in the meeting room doing programming. So that's something that you have to understand if you're going to be a football strength and conditioning coach or strength coach for any team. Um, the biggest no-nos in your field. Well, I mean, we could approach this in many different ways. I would say a big no-no for me that immediately jumps into mind is just being stuck in your ways. I always want to be a student of my craft. I want to constantly be learning, constantly be evolving, never stuck in one philosophy, never believing, I've got it figured out. I think the coach who just stays doing what they've always done, never willing to branch out and learn, never willing to challenge their own philosophies, that's how you stay stark in the dark ages. That's how you get surpassed. So a big no-no for me would be not changing your ways, not evolving, not learning. Let's see. Next question. In a carb cycling approach, what training day is the best day to program your high carb day? So you can go a few different ways with this. The two ways that I generally will go is I'll either put the high carb day on your biggest, hardest, most taxing day of training, or if you're a bodybuilder, you put that on your quote unquote weak muscle group day. Like for me, I'm really trying to bring up my legs. So I'm putting my high carb day on leg day. I'm going to get several of those meals in before I train. I'm fueled up. My glycogen stores are loaded. I'm able to push a little bit more in that training session. Now, you could also take a different approach and actually put the high carb day on a non-training day, putting it, the day before the big training day. Especially if you're training in the morning the next day, it could be a good strategy to put that high carb day the day before on that off day where you're not burning through all that glycogen that day. That day is spent resting, recovering, storing glycogen that you can then use the next day. So you can go a few different ways with that. Let's see. Which training split do you feel is most effective? I don't. If there was a most effective training split, we'd all be doing it. So questions like this, I encourage you to not look at training or nutrition or any of these things through a black and white lens. It's all about big picture context. The training split that is going to be best for you may not be best for me. You got to take things into account. Like, how advanced are you? How old are you? What does your schedule look like? What do you enjoy doing? If you're someone who you just love training and being out of the gym kind of gives you anxiety and you're bored, well, maybe going with a little bit of a higher frequency attack might be for you versus someone who's maybe older, you're more beat up. Only going into the gym 3 or 4 times a week might be better for that guy. If you're someone who's trying to gain size, maybe lowering the frequency from 5 days a week to 4 days a week might be better because you're burning less calories, you're spending more time recovering. And I'm just rambling on here, all the different variables that could go into a decision like this, but there is no best split. It's all about context, and you got to take all these different variables into account. And that's where kind of the art of programming comes in. That's where the art of coaching comes in, is just taking all of these pieces of the puzzle, putting your puzzle together. Okay, next question. Any digestion aid you take or know of? So, for most people, if you need a digestive enzyme, I would recommend betaine HCl. It's basically stomach acid in a pill, and in order to more effectively digest and break down our food, we want a more acidic environment in the stomach. So, one thing I would do right off the bat, aside from supplementation, is make sure you are removing fluid intake away from your food intake. Don't drink immediately before, during, or after your meal. That fluid intake is going to dilute the stomach acid, which is going to hinder the digestion process. Now, if you're finding you're having trouble breaking down your food, first look at the food selections. Are you potentially eating a food that you specifically just do not respond well to? Make sure your food choices themselves are setting you up for success to have good digestion. That's a huge pillar of my diet programming, is building a diet around foods that digest well for that particular individual. Now, some people are just going to have issues regardless, and then bringing in something like betaine HCl can be effective, where I would recommend taking it intra-meal. Get a few bites of food in, take a sip of water with your betaine HCl. It's going to kind of mimic that release of stomach acid in response to food entering the stomach. You can start on the lower end of the dose. If that works, stay there. If it doesn't work, increase the dose a little bit. If that works, stay there. If not, increase the dose a little bit. Find a dose of the betaine HCl that is effective. Let's see. What do you think of heavy 5 to 8 rep training compared to 15 to 20 rep training all the way to failure? Well, going back to kind of the lower volume approach I talked about for hypertrophy, if that is the goal, I would lean towards the lower rep ranges. We're going to get more effective stimulating reps in more of that 5 to 8 rep range. I would hang there as opposed to those super high 15 to 20 rep range where a lot of those reps are not effectively stimulating hypertrophy. And again, we're just incurring a bigger recovery demand. Now, with that said, it's not to say that the higher rep approach has no utility. There are absolutely times where that could be effective. But from a pure hypertrophy standpoint, I would lean towards heavier, high intensity, lower rep ranges. Let's see here. Let's hit this as the last question. Last resort gas station meals. So if you go to a decent gas station, they actually tend to have pretty decent options. A lot of these gas stations will have Greek yogurts, pre-cooked hard-boiled eggs, nuts like almonds, cashews, fruit. Some of them have salads even. Um, Beef jerky can be a decent option. Some of them are going to have, core powers, ready to drink protein shakes, muscle milks, things like that. So usually if I'm on the road and I have to resort to a gas station meal, Greek yogurt, hard boiled eggs, maybe some beef jerky. A lot of times they'll have bananas or apples, maybe a granola bar. If they don't have the Greek yogurt and eggs, I'll see if they've got the muscle milk with the core power, something like that. But usually you can actually find some decent options at the gas station. So, anyway, that's the last question I'm going to hit today. If you're listening to this, I probably released it on a Sunday, and I'll be intaking questions on Instagram, which I will answer and post up on the podcast next Sunday. We'll continue this weekly. And then the next podcast drop you hear, I'm going to be having my next guest on the show. So stay tuned, guys, and we will see you next time.